Thank you. No pressure at all. I'd like to sincerely thank you, Brian and team, for the privilege of sharing some of your very special time here while you're at NADA. And I'll try and make our time together worthwhile. Susan, where are you? Okay, are you coming along there? Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think it's probably known by most, but in the event not by all. It's important that you understand that I can't see very well, very limited vision, can't read, can't write, can't drive, can't read a computer screen, can't recognize a face in a business or social situation, so that's often very awkward for me, so I just ask people I work with to understand that limitation of mine. But what I'd like to share with you today is a perspective that I've come to know that I think is really important to share with the industry with respect to used car operations. And as counterintuitive as it may seem, the perspective that I have come to believe is that the primary objective or the primary purpose for a dealership's used car operation is not to generate a profit. Not to generate a profit. How could that be? Why are we in that business? Well, I've come to understand, or at least to believe, that the primary purpose for which dealerships operate used car departments is actually convenience and necessity. You see, we sell our new cars and we get paid in portion by cash and by trade. The problem is that we can't pay our bills with those trades. We have to convert those trades to cash. And I believe that that is, in fact, the primary purpose for the operation of used car departments at most dealerships. Now, to be sure, what I'm not saying is that it is not an objective of the used car department to make a profit. What I said is that it's not the primary objective. Why would I say that it's not the primary objective? Well, if it were the primary objective, we would be in that used car business as an investor. And presuming that we're rational, our objective as an investor is to deploy capital in a way that is most likely to achieve the highest possible return with an acceptable amount of risk. That's the objective of the rational investor. And if that was our primary motivation for operating a used vehicle department, we would behave differently. We would behave like a rational investor, but we don't. So let me see if I can prove that case to you. Suppose I came to you today and I told you that my primary objective for being here is to convince you that you should allow me to manage your own personal wealth. I'm an investment manager, and I'd like you to allow me to manage your investments. Now, if I came to you today with that message, without doubt, without question, you would have predictable questions for me. You would ask me, you would say, Dale, if I allowed you to manage my wealth, how would you invest my money? And my answers that I'd give you to that question would be, I don't know. We'll take it as it goes. We'll see what comes along. How's that feel for you so far? Pretty good, huh? And then I'm sure that somebody would say to me, well, Dale, what sort of return do you think I could expect? And my response to that question would be, I'm going to do the best I can. Somebody would say, well, how much money do I need to invest? And my answer to that would be, well, just give me your checkbook, and I'll take it when I need it, and when I got enough, I'll put some back. Now, would I stand a chance of earning your business for your personal investment with those sort of answers? And to be sure, I would not. But yet, what I've come to understand is that our used vehicle investment manager has no better answers than those. No better answers. And that's why I've come to understand and to believe that we cannot really say or believe that we're in this business, this used car operation, first and foremost to make a profit. Because if we were, we would certainly be doing differently. So what I'm going to present to you is a case for change. And I'm going to go so far as to say that I really don't think that this case for change is optional. You know, this used car business of ours used to be a really easy business. It used to be a great business. You know, back in the days before people understood as well as we did what the value of these vehicles were, how available they were, where alternatives could be found for less, we more or less had our way. And that's what made the used car business such a great business for so long. But we all understand that those days are largely in the past. Every single day, this market gets more and more transparent. It gets more and more competitive. It becomes more and more margin compressed. And consequently, the need for us to do differently is ever present. I don't think it's an option. So what I'm going to present to you for sure is a departure from the way that we've ever thought about managing our used car operations. And it's proven to be very difficult for many dealers to make this change. But once again, I would submit to you in this new, very difficult, highly margin compressed business that we're in today, we have to consider doing differently. And what I'm going to make a case for is that we apply just a minimal amount of investment discipline to this used car department operation. So there may be some limitations to the analogy of being in the used car business as an investor and being an investor for our own personal wealth. I'm sure there are some limitations to that analogy, but I don't think I'll push the limits. I think that I'll operate with you here for the next few minutes well within the limits of reasonableness in terms of keeping this analogy alive between being an investor in the used car business and being a wise personal investor. So the first thing that we would expect of our investment manager, and the first thing we should expect of our used vehicle investment manager, is that they be a student of the market. They be a student of the market. Would you have any confidence in your personal investment manager if he or she played golf every day of the week, didn't spend any time analyzing and understanding what's going on in the markets? No. So would we expect anything less of our used vehicle investment manager? I don't think we should. I say that our used car investment manager needs to be a student of their market. And what does it mean to be a student of the market? Well, it means understanding data. It means researching. It means thinking. What sort of data would we research? Lots of data. We might analyze our dealership's last 3 months' performance, same period last year. We might look at live market data. We might look at Pollak or cross-sell registration reports. But suffice it to say, a certain amount of time of that used vehicle investment manager needs to be dedicated to have a reasoned opinion as to what sort of investments we should invest our corporate capital in. Without any sort of effort in that regard, we can't really believe that we're in this business first and foremost for profit. And then once we have that reasoned analysis, which should be done on a routine basis, we need to put a couple of strategic stakes in the ground. At a minimum, a couple. One could argue many more than a couple, but I'm going to say for today, just a couple. The first thing that I think that we need to do is to have a strategy in terms of what sort of vehicles, what vehicle classifications represent the best possible return given the current circumstances with an acceptable amount of risk. Because after all, nobody would say that every vehicle in the market today represents the same opportunity for return at the same risk. Nor would anyone say that we have unlimited resources of capital and space and time and energy. So given the fact that we have limited resources, and not every sort of vehicle investment represents the same opportunity for return with the same risk, it's incumbent upon us as investors to start to make some choices. Allocate our capital in those types of vehicles that represent the best opportunity for return and an acceptable amount of risk. How do we do that? Well, what you see on the screen is essentially a spreadsheet. On the left, you see a classification and subclassifications of certain vehicle types. Across the top, you see price bands. Creates a grid with cells. Each cell represents a type of a vehicle at a particular price point. And simply stated, in light of the available data, I would ask our used vehicle investment manager to stake out what segments of vehicles represent the highest possible return with an acceptable amount of risk. Now, the analogy on the screen presumes a Chevrolet dealer in my hometown of Chicago in the month of February, the height of the winter in Chicago. So hypothetically, this used car investment manager has done their research, and they say for the foreseeable future, the vehicle segments that represent the best possible return with the least risk are three classes: intermediate vehicles, intermediate SUVs, and large trucks. And therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to consciously make that difficult choice to shut off the other segments of vehicles where we might otherwise invest our corporate capital, because they just simply are not what we believe to be the best opportunities for return at the current time. Now, I have no problem whatsoever if this strategy changes tomorrow, because the world is always changing. So we better be prepared to respond to it. No problem if that strategy changes, and it should change. And we should, in fact, review the strategy at least every 30 days. But we should never go to work for a day without having a strategy, if, in fact, we really believe we're in this business first and foremost to make a profit. And that also doesn't mean that you'll never see a vehicle on this dealership's used vehicle lot that doesn't fit one of these strategic segments. It will happen, but there'll be the exceptions. There'll be what we understand to be the opportunistic investments, not the strategic investments. And those will be the sort of vehicles that for one reason or another we come across and you just say, wow, there's just no way I cannot keep and retail that car and do well with it. They will occur. It's not a perfect science. But once again, there'll be the exceptions. So that's the first strategic stake that we need to put in the ground to model a prudent investor. And then a second one is that we need to make a decision as to how we're going to allocate our available capital across those strategic segments. If we had $1 million of capital available to us for this used car business, would it be rational that we put a third in each of these categories? No. Because within these three categories, to be sure, some represent better opportunities than others. So again, acting just a bit like a rational investor, we'll make some choices. And the way that we'll measure the depth of our capital investment in each one of these strategic categories is by using a target dealership day supply. Not to be confused with market day supply, a target dealership day supply. So for example, we might say that in the heart or height of the winter in Chicago, for the next 30 days or so, our target is to have a 60-day dealership day supply of intermediate SUVs, perhaps a 45-day supply of intermediate vehicles, and a 30-day supply of large trucks. And again, that's based on our reasoned analysis and research. So now we put two strategic stakes in the ground that will drive our execution for stocking. Now, it's not okay in this new environment which we do business not to have a strategy. It's too tough. Nor is it okay, not okay, to come to work every day and not balance our portfolio against our stated strategy. If you don't want to balance your portfolio against your stated strategy, then change your strategy. Or if you're not willing to do either, please acknowledge that we're not really in this used car business first and foremost to make a profit, because we wouldn't be behaving as a rational investor would do. So with these stakes in the ground, and one could argue we should put many more, but again, I want to work well within the limits of this analogy, and I'm going to say for now just these two strategic decisions, what segments, and relatively speaking, to what extent we're going to invest our capital in those segments. But here's where technology becomes very, very useful and, quite frankly, very exciting. Because technology can make our job of execution really not just simple, but brilliant. The technology will first indicate to us where we need to make our adjustments. The red says that we need to decrease our inventory in these strategic segments to match our stated strategy. The green says we need to increase. So for example, if you look at the intermediate segment of SUVs between $15,000 and $20,000, it's green, and it says that we need 8. We need 8 vehicles in that segment right now to achieve our desired strategy of having a 60-day supply. Okay, 3 steps of execution lie ahead of us. Number 1, what vehicles would I go out and source to have the best possible chance of success? How much should I pay for those vehicles? And where in the world would I find them? And I'm going to demonstrate to you how with 3 simple clicks of a mouse, we can answer these 3 critical questions with simplicity and brilliance like we've never been able to do it before. So watch what happens with a click of a mouse. We get what we call a recommendation list. And the first vehicle on this recommendation list is a vehicle that we need to fill the first of those 8 slots of intermediate SUVs. And it happens to be an 07 Volkswagen Touareg with a V6. Now, that's kind of a strange choice to come up as the number 1 first recommended vehicle of 8 for intermediate SUVs if you're a Chevrolet dealer in February in Chicago. It might be the last vehicle that an experienced used car manager would ever consider, but yet it in fact is the best. So why do we know it's the best? How do we know it's the best? Well, you'll notice that there's a letter grade on this vehicle. And I believe the letter grade on this vehicle is A-. Is that correct, Susan? Okay. Well, we understand the letter grade system from our school days, but we still don't really understand what makes it an A-. So watch what technology and data allows us to do today. We can look behind that A-, and what we can see are 7 distinct attributes of every vehicle in every market every day. And every one of these 7 attributes has a profound impact on the likely outcome of that vehicle on this dealer's lot. We take a weighted average of these 7, and that's how it got the A-. And note that I said a weighted average. So it's kind of like getting an A- at the end of a semester, but you took some quizzes, some tests, a midterm, a final, and they were all weighted a little bit differently. So allow me to introduce each one of these 7 attributes. The first is what we call demand. This vehicle gets an A+ for demand. What does that mean? That means of all the intermediate sport utilities in the $15,000 to $20,000 category in this dealer's market this month, this vehicle is being sought, being searched by consumers in the 99th percentile. In other words, less than 1% of intermediate sport utilities, $15,000 to $20,000 in this dealer's markets, are being requested to be seen more often than this vehicle. Huh. Wow. What a great place to start. A vehicle that actually has a demonstrated track record of people looking for it like crazy. But you know, seldom do people do a search for a vehicle as specific as an 07 Volkswagen Touareg with a V6. I mean, who does that? Nobody really. What shoppers are likely to do when they do searches is maybe just enter Volkswagen Touareg, or maybe just Touareg. So how do we know that it's the 07 and the one with the V6? Well, that's the next letter grade that we call interest. And for this, it gets an A. Why does it get an A? Because this vehicle converts search result pages of Volkswagen Touaregs to vehicle detail pages of Volkswagen Touaregs, this specific vehicle, 07 with a V6, and an astounding 7.27% conversion ratio. And for those of us who don't understand that metric, I would tell you that most cars in the industry today, between a search result page and a vehicle detail page, will convert maybe around 2%. So this is better than 3 times the average. So not only can technology and data today show us what vehicles people are searching on the most, in this case, in this category, Volkswagen Touaregs, but being able to see which ones they click on and how long they spend on those pages looking at those photos and descriptions and possibly imagining themselves owning those vehicles tells us or provides us with a further refinement of their true intent. And for whatever reason, and I really don't care, where they are gravitating to are the 07s with V6s. The next attribute that we grade is volume. There are certainly a lot of cars out there that are vehicles of curiosity. This one actually gets an A because of all of the intermediate $15,000 to $20,000 sport utilities that are retailing in this dealer's environment. It's in the 90+ percentile with 11 sold in the last 45 days. 11 at that very specific level of an 07 V6. Next attribute, for those of you who are velocity-minded, you really understand well and appreciate, is we grade it based on its market day supply, and it gets an A with a nice low 37 market day supply. And for those of you who don't really appreciate the importance of market day supply, it shows you the relationship of that vehicle's supply and its demand in the market. What does that mean? Well, the lower the market day supply, the easier it is for you to find a buyer, and the less sensitive the vehicle is to price competition. So for this, it gets a nice letter grade of an A. The next attribute that we score is the profitability. Today, we're able to see the spread between the average retail and wholesale price of that vehicle in that market at the current moment, and it gets a B. It's an 80th some percentile. So in other words, if you were only looking to fill the first of these 8 slots of intermediate $15,000 to $20,000 CVs with the ones that have the highest amount of profit spread, there would be better choices. But on balance, this one is pretty good overall. Next attribute is availability. What's the point of sending you down a rabbit hole looking for vehicles that can't be, great vehicles that can't be found? And for this, it also gets a B. And then ultimately, the 7th attribute that we score is your dealership's past experience, if any, with this vehicle. And in this case, it got an A because you sold 4 in the last 45 days with an average day on the lot of 21 days. Now, I ask you, have we ever been able to know better as to what sort of vehicles have the highest probability of success on our lot? Have we ever been able to do this before? Do these factors matter? I think pretty sure they do. So how about that? The first of these 8 slots, a vehicle that is counterintuitive to that used car operator, but yet has the highest probability of success in that market. First step of execution. That's the car I want to zero in on. Next question of execution is, what should I pay for it? And this is the one that I'm particularly passionate about. Passionate about all of these steps of execution, but this one really is something that I really care deeply about. There's a lot of noise out in the marketplace between consumers and dealers and finance institutions as to what a vehicle is worth. Lots of different sources, lots of different opinions. But what I'm going to demonstrate for you is what I would consider to be the most rational, intelligent means for anybody, consumer, dealer, or finance institution, to put a value on a vehicle. And you'll notice the way that we do it is that we provide what's called bid guidance. Bid guidance. For a version of the 07 Volkswagen V6 Touareg that has low, average, or high odometer mileage. And for this vehicle with average miles, it gives us bid guidance of $15,324. It says that we should feel comfortable paying up to $15,324. Now, how in the world would it come up with such a number, and why? Well, today, not only can we see what vehicles in every market every day are being searched for with the greatest amount of frequency, but we can see the price points at which they get the most amount of consumer activity. Huh. In other words, we've got a really, really good idea about how to get out before we get in. Something that every good car man and woman has always understood to be a prudent principle, but until recently, not feasible because we didn't have the visibility to the retail market in the past that we have today. But today we know what that number is. We know that if you want to put that vehicle in the market today, with the highest likelihood of transacting, you would put that vehicle in the market for $17,924. Not to say you have to, but if you wanted to, that's the spot. And from that number, we're going to deduct your dealership's minimum desired gross profit, in this case, $1,500. Deduct your dealership's reasoned estimate for reconditioning of such a vehicle, in this case, $800. Deduct your dealership's PAC or fees or transportation, in this example, $200, and we're going to derive the number of $15,324. So in other words, if we get this vehicle for that amount of money, we can price it in the market on day one where it is likely to transact, cover our minimum front-end gross profit objective, our reconditioning, and our expenses. Now I ask you, has there ever been a way to more rationally derive the value of a vehicle? Could a blind guy from Chicago not do this better than a so-called expert of 30 years in this market? I think so. The third executional question, oh, by the way, that's not to say you shouldn't ever pay over that amount for the car. If, in fact, you really need the car, and let's not forget, it's all being driven by our strategy. Oh, yeah, that strategy, that thing. It's telling us that we need this vehicle. It's telling us that this is the very best of all the vehicles of its kind. If we have to pay a bit over it, it's okay, providing, and this is the key part, providing you know what you're doing before you do it. Because I presume if you're rational and you know what you're doing before you do it, you have a purpose and a reason for doing it. But the difference is, to the extent that you decide consciously to pay over that amount, you're doing it with your eyes wide open. In other words, you're doing it with full recognition of what it means in terms of compromising your ability to price it competitively and/or make the profit that you desire to make. And if circumstances dictate doing it and you're aware of it, okay. But if you're not aware of it, not okay. Third, final step of execution. Where in the world do I find this car? This is something that our industry struggles with mightily, mightily. Oh, I can't find the right cars. I can't find the right cars at the money that I can justify paying. I hear it all the time. Used car buyers across the country lament about this problem non-stop. And I understand why they lament, but I also know it to be false. I know it to be false. And I know why they lament. Because in the past, the only way that we ever really needed to know how to source used cars was either to stand on our lot and wait for nice trade-ins to arrive, or we'd go to our local auction where we're presented with a dearth of vehicles, many of which we could buy cheap. But even if we had to pay up, we could pay up and bring them back to our lot and ask ridiculously big money, and we still saw customers. These days are gone. And if these are the only ways that you know how to source vehicles, I understand your frustration. Today, you can source vehicles, and I'm not telling you it's easy, but I'm telling you it can be done, and it is being done. It requires skills that we have not developed in the past, and it requires tools, and it requires greater effort. Sorry about that, but greater effort. But with a simple click of a mouse, we can see every wholesale auction where this vehicle is available. And in this case, lo and behold, it's available right in the dealer's backyard at their local Mannheim auction. We can see the day that it's going to run. We can see the time it's going to run. We can see the lane it's going to run. We know the run number. If it's got an electronic condition report, we've got that right at our fingertips. And we could place a proxy bid right here, right now, and be done. Now I ask you, have we ever had a better way to know how and where and what to pay for these vehicles? I don't think so. But you know, the frustration for me and the irony is that as much as we need to do this sort of thing to achieve profitability in this most difficult market, it has proven to be very difficult for our used car investment managers to adopt this approach. Why wouldn't they? I mean, it makes sense to have a strategy. The technology and the data that's available to our decision makers today is amazing. It's brilliant. It's amazing. Why would anybody buy a car, make a decision what to pay, or go through the gyrations that we go through to find out where to buy them when it could be done this well and this simply? It's the sort of thing that keeps me up at night. And I guess that I can only conclude that it requires a change of habit. And I guess habits are very difficult to change. But once again, I would say to you that it's really my opinion that this isn't a matter of choice. It's a matter of necessity. Because this used car business is really, really a highly margin-compressed environment. And you know, in that margin-compressed environment in which we do business, I ask dealers, how is it that you think it's reasonable for you to expect to make more money this year than you made last year? Because the margins are not going to get easier, they're going to get tougher. You know, never in our career have we seen a wholesale environment where we have to pay more to acquire a good used vehicle. Never in our careers have we seen more pricing pressure to force us to price these cars for less in order to see enough customers sell enough cars to pay our bills. And that's not going to get any easier. It's going to get harder. So how are we going to make more money? You know, when you start with less, it's only reasonable to expect that you're going to end up with less. So I ask dealers all the time, I said, what's your strategy? What's your plan? And when they think about it hard, sometimes they come up with the answer, well, I guess I have to sell more. And I say, yeah, I guess you do have to sell more. But that's only half the answer, I tell them. The other half of the answer is that you have to sell more quickly. Why? Because I think on day one, a vehicle barely has enough spread in it to make a meaningful marginal contribution to the bottom line. And unless cars stop depreciating, I'm pretty sure that when you start with less and they depreciate, very quickly you run out of juice in these cars, run out of margin. And if you're going to sell more cars more quickly, the imperative is that you stock more cars at all times that are more fresh. And now you get to the essence of the strategy of velocity management. We have to sell more vehicles more quickly. And in order to do that, we have to do a lot of things differently. A lot of things differently. What I've really come to understand that's very difficult about achieving velocity success is that it cannot be approached as a cafeteria method. You can't decide, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. I wish it were that easy, but it's not. You have to do it all. And what doing all of it means is being prepared to embrace change. And I mean change at every level. Because that marketplace out there has changed, and it forces us to respond appropriately to it. So selling more quickly has a lot of implications. But at the heart of it, I would suggest to you, is the efficient deployment of investment capital. And that's the case for provisioning inventory. Thank you very much.
All right, questions? Whoa, questions from the audience. Someone raise their hand.
I can't see hands, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry. Questions for Dale? Wow, look at that. Okay, so how many people are following Dale's recommendation today to the letter? Dale, there's no hands going. There's no hands going up. All right, so if you are not following Dale's recommendations to the letter, there has to be a barrier. What's holding back the change? Now the hands are going up. This is, I feel like Dr. Phil. Here we go.
The market day supply is based on a previous 45 days unit sold that tries to gauge it going forward, correct? Like, if we are in a business that is seasonal, if you're in the northern states or we're like us in Canada, the previous 45 days sold of, say, a sports car is not as applicable going into a winter month. And the same thing in the winter, going into the summers, those SUVs would be less opportunistic to capture. How do you gauge for the seasonality of the business, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, first, and fair point, market day supply arithmetically is defined as the current available supply of a given vehicle in the market at the moment, let's say there's 10, divided by its average daily retail sales rate over the past 45 days, let's say it's 1. And by the way, that's a rolling 45 days, of course. So you divide the 10 by the 1 and you get what we call a 10-day supply. And to your point, the denominator of that equation is in fact historical, 45 days. So, you know, we could say, should it be 30 days? You know, perhaps, maybe it should. But I sort of think that 30 days is a little bit brief, and I sort of think that 60 days is a little wrong. So I've settled on 45, but I took much, I took sort of much solace in that decision based on what we as dealers have come to understand from our traditional practice in new cars, and that is that, you know, the day supply of our new vehicles, as calculated by the manufacturers, has always been based on a 45-day supply, and that doesn't make it right. But to your point, when we looked in the provision grading system, and you saw those 7 attributes, one of those attributes was market day supply. And for those of you who have looked closely, I've often got the question, why do you place so little weight on market day supply? Because after all, Dale, you've been espousing the importance of market day supply in the decision-making process of what cars, what money, what price, and yet you give it relatively little weight compared to the other 9 metrics. And the answer to that question is that we have 2 other indicators of those 7 that speak to demand, but speak to demand more in the current market, and those being the demand grade and the interest grade. So due to our association today with Autotrader.com and our ability to read in real time what's being searched and what's being clicked on, we now have much more current timely demand data, which supplements or augments the historical 45-day retail trend. And consequently, we had to weight that down because we had more current indicators. So is this a perfect science? No. But it is, I think, pretty clearly superior to any other, previous decision-making process or support that we've had in the past.
There's a follow-up question, but Dale, I just want to clarify. So using AutoTrader search data, as you're coming from the winter months into the spring months, you would see a decrease in, say, SUV and trucks, maybe if those were the very popular winter models. So as the spring comes, you would be seeing, wow, there's a decline of interest for this vehicle, so that becomes a very accurate real-time indicator of interest, and that would be, say, weighted higher than the market day supply.
Yeah, I mean, we would see that decline on a daily basis in the springtime, where that market day supply would be sort of a lagging 45 days. So I think we've got, the best available source we have to make that, recommendation as timely as possible. And listen, by the way, it shouldn't be missed that I don't bring you a solution here or an approach that says that it is so perfect that we don't need, good human instinct and judgment, interpreting the data. I still think that we do.
So how are the 7 weighted equally, or are they weighted at different levels?
They're weighted at different levels.
And what are those levels?
Yeah, and maybe while we go on to the next questions, maybe Susan can put up the relative weightings.
Great,
great.
Okay.
And listen, I don't presume to know better than maybe you know, so I allow you to modify the weightings if you don't like the way that we've got them set. But I will tell you that we spent better part of a year testing these assumptions that support these weightings. So I would encourage anyone who uses the system to give it a good effort with the default weightings, but obviously it's your decision-making process. You can reweight them.
Okay, we have another question.
I first want to thank you personally. We signed up with vAuto last year at NADA. I'm a Canadian independent dealer.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have last year, so we signed up at NADA. We sold just under 600 units last year. We appraised every vehicle, whether it was auction or taking it a trade. We gained an extra $600 gross per unit by doing that. So it was a great success for us.
Well, thank you.
As an independent, we're sourcing vehicles from everywhere. I look into the U.S. for some late model vehicles, as some of them are released up to 6 months prior to us. I also know that some vehicles in Canada actually are cheaper. Is there something coming down the line that would give either American dealers the option to see our inventory in Canada and vice versa for us to be able to look and see what's available in the U.S. for stocking purposes?
NAFTA? Good question. From a technical perspective, there's no reason why we couldn't do it because, all the data's there. So let me take that, and if you wouldn't mind, follow up with me on that. And let me assess the feasibility of doing that. And I can't really, off the top of my head, see any reason why it wouldn't make sense given what you've told me. But I also, I want to thank you for your endorsement. But I want to be very clear, and I tell dealers this all the time. I don't believe that any tool, any software, any tool of any sort is ever the answer to long-term sustainable success. I mean, I've been around this business all my life, and what I really have come to know is that the only thing that ever produces long-term, sustained performance, success is a proper strategy well executed. And that means, people and process. And somewhere in between sort of the strategy, the people, and the process, I'm sure there's a role and a function for tools. But it's never the tool. It's the strategy. So I have to tell you something. I've often sometimes been accused, you get on these stages and it's a lot of commercial self-interest and okay, I'll take that criticism. But in reality, I'm not a software salesman. I'm selling something, but what I'm selling is a strategy. Because regardless of what tools or technology you use, none of it is going to make a hill of beans of difference in the end, in my opinion, if you don't execute a proper strategy. So again, I appreciate the success you've had, and I applaud it, but I would argue that the success that you've had is largely attributed to the adoption of the velocity method of management.
And of course, this is the Digital Marketing Strategies Conference, where you pick up the best strategies, most current strategies. What are the reasons why you are not implementing this? Anybody want to raise their hand on this? What's blocking you for implementing this at your dealership?
Yeah, well, I mean, what do you guys know that I don't know? Or what is it that I have in my mind that isn't right? I mean,
because based on your hand raising, Dale, is pie in the sky. This is impossible to implement if no one in here is saying I could follow that rule. What's the roadblocks? All right, go ahead.
Please.
When you're searching the vehicles to buy and purchase, your A unit, you had it on the screen a while ago. You said you had a Volkswagen A+, and you looked at your market
A-, but okay.
A-, in the market day supply there. But you said V6. How do you know that car doesn't have nav or res or, you're going off a scarcity report to get that information in market day supply. But you got to go in there manually to do that. How can your system point that out to us?
Great question. So on a classified advertising site like AutoTrader or Cars.com, when somebody searches for a Volkswagen Touareg, they'll get pages back, maybe 3-4 pages. Each page on AutoTrader contains 25 cars. On Cars.com, each page contains 50 of those cars. So what we're able to see, as I mentioned, is not only what pages they're requesting to be seen, in this case Volkswagen Touaregs, but as they flip through those pages, which ones are they drilling down on? And then what we observe and we track are what are the common characteristics to those vehicles that are being clicked on the most often. And in some vehicles, there are only a few common characteristics, as is the case in this example, those being the 07s and the V6s. But if you were to do the same exercise, let's say on a truck, you would see lots of characteristics that would break down these recommendations. So, obviously, a half-ton, but the cab style, the bed, the transmission, the engine, sometimes even the differential is so common to those click down to the VDP that we break them out at that level of granularity. So the level of granularity is completely dependent on the frequency of the characteristics of the vehicles that are being clicked on. It's really interesting. And when you understand how sophisticated we're able to see that and how clearly we're able to see it, you got to just wonder why not everybody, why anybody would buy a vehicle without consulting at that level. Because these are the small things that really, the success occurs at the margins. It's the small things that you do or don't do that really largely separate the pack. And today it's so exciting that we have available data and technology to do this thing that we do so much better than we've ever done it in the past, and yet it just seems so hard.
So this is a perfect example of this term big data. Taking this huge data warehouse of millions of clicks and page views and then distilling this down into actionable data. This is a result, these type of tools, these decision models, is a result of big data. But for some reason, it's still getting, what I'm seeing from this group, there's some roadblocks in getting this adopted at the dealership level. Here's a hand. How can we move this forward?
Dale.
Yes.
This is Brett Stevenson from Dealer Marketing Magazine. My question is, I'd like to turn it back on you a little bit because I think you might know better than everyone else in this room. You have booths at NADA. I couldn't find anything wrong with what you're pitching basically here. It sounds perfect for everyone. When people come to your booth and they don't buy it, what is the obstacle? Why would they not?
It's really a great question. You know, through the years, I've presented this to quite a few number of dealers. And the fascinating thing is that you seldom ever get a no, thank you. But that doesn't mean that you get a lot of yeses either. Although I will tell you that we've gotten a lot of yeses. We have, you know, just to be clear, we have in the US about 5,000 dealerships that are attempting to have success at the velocity level of management. And I will tell you that we get most of them there. And when I say we get most of them there on an objective basis, and we track this and measure this routinely because we think it's one of our key performance indicators, and that is the number of retail turns. Not to say that the number of retail turns is everything that you need to know about success, but we do believe that it is one of the leading indicators. And I'll tell you today that we have a good third of our 5,000 or so US dealers turning their inventory now 12 times or better, versus an NADA stated average of maybe 6 to 8 times. And we watch that number, that third, constantly grow. So we do get you guys there, but it is, to be sure, a process. But to your question specifically, they don't say no, ever, hardly ever, but yet they don't say yes. So they go away and they say, well, you know, let me think about that. But really, I think what I've come to understand is they're struggling. Internally, they're struggling because they know it makes sense. But they're walking away not saying yes, probably thinking, am I prepared to do this? Do I want, you know, am I really prepared to do this? Will my people do it? Questioning their own leadership sometimes. Do I have what it takes to bring my organization, you know, around to this sort of culture change of management? And those are often unanswered questions. And I think it would be impossible for most of those people to look themselves in the mirror in the morning and say no. But that doesn't mean that they have to say yes either. In their mind, I think they are thinking about it because they know they should. But for whatever reason, they are just not confident enough of their ability or commitment level to do it, even though they know they should. But they can't say no. That's what's so interesting. Sometimes in my earlier days when I sold a lot of software, it often would be the times that I'd call up a dealer and say, just tell me no. Just say no, thank you. Well, let me get back to you. No, just please, this is the 4th time. Just tell me no. And they can't do it. And that really, you know, it didn't occur to me at first, but over time it really, you know, has come to my understanding that it's just darn difficult to say no, but we can rationalize a lot of ways to not say yes. If that answers your question.
Well, Dale, you've challenged many people here in this room to ask themselves a question: do they have the leadership to make change at their dealership? That's my takeaway. With so few people raising their hands, will this conference challenge you to go back to the dealership, and whether it's vAuto or another tool, are you going to change the way you operate your business? And I want to thank Dale for coming. Would you please give him a warm thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you know, in all sincerity, Brian, I just want to say thank you to you because you've been one of the industry leaders that has really risen up and, you know, asked all of us to rethink all sorts of different things we do. And you know, that's where we are today. We have to question everything. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.